I'm Rosanna and I am the Corporate Procurement Officer for Teignbridge, South Hams and West Devon. I also provide procurement advice to our tackle company, our IT tackle company, Strata Service Solutions. Started out in procurement about 8 years ago as an assistant buyer at Exeter University. Worked on to become a senior buyer. Then I went into the private sector to Flybe, and now I'm here. There's a lot more governance. It's very thorough. In the private sector, you can essentially pick up a phone and say, what price can you give me? And in the public sector, it needs to be seen to be fair because we're using public money at the end of the day. I believe it is fair. It's based on the EU principles. We've now left the EU, but we are part of the government procurement agreement on our own in the UK. But we've upheld to those principles, and one of those principles is fairness. So when we are running tenders, we ensure that all suppliers are given the clarification question, the clarification answer. We evaluate the tenders objectively. So even if we've got an incumbent there who is part of the tender process, it's my job to tell officers to evaluate objectively and evaluate what is on the paper. Don't evaluate what has happened in the past. So I do believe that they are the public procurement process is fair. There's a lot of paperwork involved, which needs to be done because of the governance, and we need to make sure all of our checks are done. There's a standard selection questionnaire by the CCS, which is the Crown Commercial Service in central government. They tell us that we have to include that standard selection questionnaire in all of our procurements, and that can be quite lengthy. On top of that, we want to ask them questions about what quality we'll be getting, and then they need to submit their prices. There's a specification they need to read through. But all of this is done to ensure that we are getting the best value for money. We're getting a good price for good quality, and it's not a case that we can just ring up someone and say, what price can you give me for this, this and this? If it's a high value tender, then we just can't do that. To some, it may not be easy, but please don't be afraid to either pick up the phone or ideally ask a question through the portal so it's all audited, and we can answer your questions for you. Well, with SMEs, you may get the innovation that isn't there in certain larger companies. Who knows? I could be wrong, but that's, you know, that's an opinion of mine, especially at this time in our lives with the cost of living crisis approaching, a possible recession approaching. You know, we need to be seen to be responsible and making sure that we are helping those smaller businesses. We do really care about SMEs, and in the future I'd like to see SMEs forming a big part of our supply base. At the moment, no. However, in 2023, the Public Contracts Regulations of 2015 will be overhauled, and there is a green paper online if anybody wants to go and look at what the Public Contracts Regulations may look like. It's not finalised yet. However, once these are released, the vision is that the procurement procedures are going to go from 7 to 3, so that will be easier in itself, and we're hoping that there'll be less red tape, as it's referred to, and we're hoping that it will be an easier and streamlined process. Currently there are 7, and this ranges from an open tender, whereby we ask the whole market, a restricted tender, whereby we ask the whole market, shortlist it, and then we run a second stage tender through that shortlist. There's a competitive procedure with negotiation, where we shortlist and then we run negotiations with them. There's a competitive dialogue, and many more. And the vision is that these procedures will go down to 3 procedures. These vary from council to council, and universities everywhere will have different contract procedure rules, their own contract procedure rules that they follow. And these contract procedure rules are created from the Public Contracts Regulations 2015. In Teignbridge, we have our values at 10,000 to 100,000 is a request for quotation, also known as an RFQ. 100,000 upwards is a tender. Again, this can vary, but as long as it's fair and objective, then it's fine. So at Teignbridge, we have a scoring system of 1 to 10. And then each question we ask them in terms of quality is scored against 1 to 10, and that is given a ratio. So say you're asking a question about your method statement and it's given 20%, the officer will then score 1 to 10 of that 20%, and it will get given a weighting against that question. I remove all the commercial information, so I remove all the pricing. I provide the officers or the evaluation team the tenders without the commercial information. They then evaluate it, and then it comes back to us, and we have a moderation meeting, and I add the pricing in, and that's when we look at any variances we have in the scores, something that someone may have missed, or maybe we've got an incumbent and one officer has scored a little bit higher because they're not scoring it objectively. That's then my job to say, well, you're not scoring this objectively, please can you go back and revise your scores, if you know, and then it's a bit of a debate that goes on. And the reason why I take away the commercial information is because I want the officers to score it objectively. I don't want them to go, oh, well, this is a bit cheaper, so I'm going to give them a higher score. So at the moment, anything under 10,000 is essentially a minimum of 1 quote. And rather than officers doing a search on Google, at the moment I have a database on the website where suppliers can tell us what they can offer in terms of goods, works and services. This then gets fed through a database which officers can refer to. However, speaking to SupplyDevon, I understand that we can use SupplyDevon for this. So in the future, we may possibly be able to use that facility. When it gets from 10,000 to 100,000, that's when we use SupplyDevon, which, you know, very user-friendly. Takes about a minute to set up as a supplier, because I've done a test myself. So that's that one. 100,000 upwards is a tender, and that is done on our Proactis portal at www.supplyingthesouthwest.org.uk. This is a portal whereby it's a little bit more lengthy in terms of the questions that are being asked, and also it takes about half a day to a day to get approved onto the system. But then once you're approved onto that system, you've got access to mostly every single council in the southwest, all the way from Wiltshire down to Plymouth. In the future, who knows what it will look like. We could have just one portal that encompasses everything, but at the moment I think that this is the good route to go down, because you'll have the tender territory, which will be Proactis, which will be one portal for a lot of councils, and then those councils that do use SupplyDevon, that will be more inclined to the SMEs and the local suppliers, and that will help Teignbridge achieve their objectives of spending more locally.